It's been a hot minute, especially with the British Grand Prix behind us. We have a lot to digest from that, but, we saw Ferrari struggle, but we saw McLaren really come out strong, both at the beginning and the end of the race. Second and fourth is nothing to sneeze at. And while we're seeing a lot of movement from different constructors all over the place, there's one constructor that's seemingly slowly dropping back into the pack, and that would be Aston Martin. Fernando Alonso finished at 7th at Silverstone, and Stroll took 14th. This is not a good look for the second best car on the field. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on with Aston Martin. And I believe the issue is twofold. So in Canada, Alonso finished in second place. But we're seeing other cars get better while Aston Martin hasn't. We've seen, Mercedes get better, although not in practice or in qualifying, really. We've seen McLaren get a lot better. That can be seen with the second and fourth place finish at Silverstone. And we're seeing Williams get better. We're expecting Williams to score points now, which is really odd for the sport at this point. For years, Williams has been kind of the downtrodden, the back of the pack, and it became a joke. But that team seems to be getting its stuff together. Whereas Aston Martin came out strong, came out punching really hard, we're seeing them kind of just fade back into the pack, and we're trying to figure out. We've seen upgrades done to the car, but we're not seeing upgraded results necessarily. I think that other cars are getting better. And then we get to our second point, and this will be a little bit more controversial. I think that the talent on Aston Martin has hit its peak. Fernando Alonso is a world-class driver, world champion, 2 times over, deserves all the accolades from anyone. He's had to survive Sebastian Vettel, he's had to survive Lewis Hamilton, and he had to rise above Michael Schumacher. And that's the type of driver that he is. He's a great driver, and he's intimidating to anybody who's in front of him. However, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the point right now, because he did have a second place finish in Canada, but age does eventually catch up with all of us. It's just a matter of life. And yes, Alonso is in better shape than probably any other 41-year-old, but how long can he maintain a high level of driving as he gets older? But that's not the talent issue that I'm talking about here. I'm talking about Lance Stroll. And I hammer on this guy so much, but I think we're seeing exactly what Lance Stroll is. A middle-of-the-road driver who had a tremendous amount of money thrown behind him. Granted, all of these drivers are rich. All these people come from money. So it's not like they've ever been hard up for it. But Lance Stroll is an exception. When he was with Williams, it was mostly because Lawrence Stroll was throwing money at Williams. And then with the whole thing with Force India, and Racing Point, that's when Lance Stroll went over to that team, because Lawrence was now the owner of that team. And we're seeing Lance Stroll put in not so great finishes, We're seeing Lance Stroll put in not so great efforts in a car that is supposed to be the second best car on the field. 14th. But and it's not just the finishes. It's not just the finishes with Lance Stroll. It's that he looks so dangerous to be driving around. We saw that with Gasly and Silverstone. He has no awareness, and he doesn't have any thought to anyone around him. I think that he's really just an okay driver in an excellent car with a great teammate. And Alonso's quote of Lance Stroll being a potential multi-time world champion. Listen, I'm a potential world champion in Formula One, but it doesn't mean that I'll make it. I obviously won't. And Lance Stroll isn't going to be a world champion. And I think it's time to accept that. Now, if you're okay with Lance Stroll putting in maybe a few points every now and again, but mostly finishing in the teens, then okay, that's your team. But I don't think Aston Martin wants that, and I don't think that's what's expected at this point of Aston Martin. Aston Martin's expectations are now kind of a burden from their success, but that's not a bad thing. But it can be a bad thing if at some point you don't start performing again. Alonso will most likely continue to put in points, but I think we'll see the same from Lance Stroll week after week after week, and it gets annoying. He's not going to be a world champion, because the reality is that for him to be a world champion, he'll have to go through Max, he'll have to go through Lando, he'll have to go through Albon. He'll have to go through Albon to become world champion, and that's not going to be acceptable for this team. So I think that's why we're seeing Aston Martin kind of fall back in some of these races, that, you know, other cars are getting better, and this team has Lance Stroll. I don't know if that continues. I think we have a lot of silly season coming up, either this season or next season. So we'll have to really monitor what's going on with Lance and what's going on with other drivers. Lawrence is his father. Who knows? Do you fire your son? It's a question that needs to be asked. I think that he's just not good enough for this team. If you want to succeed, you're not going to have Lance Stroll on your team. But anyways, that's my thoughts towards the whole Aston Martin issue. If you found this video enjoyable, please consider liking and subscribing. And I'll see you all on the next one. Take care.